Hello interwebs, welcome to Let's Fix Computers. I wasn't going to bother recording this repair because this is a HP tower. I don't care, it doesn't matter what it is, it's some junk box. We'll find out in a minute. It's stone dead and it probably has a dead power supply in it, but I took the cover off and then immediately took it back on and turned on the camera because it's a really good one and I know you guys love a good gawk. So here we go. Ah! Don't breathe in. So yeah, those are some cracking dust bunnies. Look at that. What's that? What are those? I'm gonna gingerly dig in there with some tweezers. Is it one piece? Gross. So yeah, this is probably a dead power supply if it's stone dead because it's an old computer. This is an AMD Vision, I think. Yeah, which means what's that motherboard? AHD2. I don't know. I think this is an FM2 system. It's either got an AM3 Plus socket in it or it's an FM2, maybe FM2 Plus. Which either way, it's an APU. Is my point. AMD APU. So it's TAT. That much being said, it's got space for extra RAM, and you could put an SSD in this. It depends if it's a good APU, I guess. Like, if it's like an A4 or an A6, then this thing is going to be awful. Whereas if it's got like an A10 or maybe an A8 in it, then it's a case of, okay, that's not horrendous for a desktop computer. Stick an SSD in it and it'll be okay. But also, just if the power supply has gone bang, then that makes this very difficult to justify putting money into. But we'll get to that. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take it out the back and give it a good old dust. So let's get the camera set up out the back. It's a lovely sunny day and we can get some cracking dusting pictures. Today's dusting is being done with a DataVac 500 watt electric duster. I'm reviewing this and another electric duster. Not going to give any opinions, saving that for the review, but just in case anyone's wondering what I'm using, that's what I got. Gosh, what a difference that makes, doesn't it? Right, I guess we'll plug it in and we'll see what it does now. Okay, we have got a green light on the back of the power supply. These HP computers have a little green LED at the back to indicate that the standby rail is up. So we've got that. Okay. That was quarter fan spin and the light on the back of the power supply has gone out. That's probably still a bad power supply, just because the standby rail just died. Does it do it again? No, now it's turbo dead. Okay. Right, what I'll do is I'll get the Amtech out and we will see how that guy can do. Standby power and ignition. Whoa! Darn hell. Woo! Okay, so. Woo! Right, so what the heck was all that about? How did we just go from being just a dusty computer to a dusty computer that's on fire? So, the component that caught fire is a high-side MOSFET going into a CPU VRM. So that's one of the voltage regulator modules that powers the CPU. The VRMs are powered from the 12-volt EPS connector here, the 4-pin, or it would be 8-pin on a bigger motherboard. And there's a couple of those VRMs arranged around the CPU that do its V-core, which is the core power, and there's a couple of others that do auxiliary rails and stuff like that. So the high-side MOSFET switches in pulses of 12 volts into the VRM. This energizes a coil or an inductor on the VRM, and then when the high side switches off, the low side brings the circuit down to ground, and that creates a negative at the input of the coil and a positive at the output, and you now have a power supply bringing low voltage into the CPU. So then the cycle begins anew. The high side pulses another 12 volts into the coil, energizes it, the low side's cut in, and you have low voltage going into the CPU again. So because the high side is on the 12-volt rail, it's exposed to a very high power rail. In this instance, the HP power supply can do up to 150 watts to that EPS connector, which is not a huge amount of power. So what was most likely happening was it was sitting there just shorted out, and when we switched it on, the power supply was tripping and we were getting that little twitch of the fan, and that was all. But when I plugged in the Antec power supply that has much, much higher power capabilities behind it, it was not phased by this sudden high power load that it was seeing. And it was just like, you want it, you got it, and just put out everything it could. In this instance, its 12-volt rails can do up to 480 watts each. So we had 480 watts with no cutout going into there. That's why it caught fire when it didn't on the HP. So what was this avoidable is the next obvious question. Yes and no. So that MOSFET was already dead. The motherboard was already dead when the computer came into the shop. That's why it didn't turn on. Most likely that MOSFET had overheated under all of that dust and failed short. And the HP power supply wasn't enough to show it up, but the Antec did show it up. Now, if I had checked for a short circuit across the EPS connector before trying to turn this thing on, I'd have seen a short circuit and known that there was a problem there, and we could have avoided the flames. But that's not something you would typically check for when doing diagnostics on a computer like this. It's not something that I would expect to see. Certainly not on a board like this anyway. So I did not check for it. And as I say, if I had, I could have checked for it, I could have seen it, and we could have avoided the flames, but we still would have had a failed high-side MOSFET, and we still would have had a dead motherboard. So the outcome of this is exactly the same. The motherboard is dead. All we did was just set it on fire. So there you go. So just for the glory shot, let's have a quick look at it under the microscope. So there is our very exploded high-side MOSFET. It's got a crater in it now. You can see this guy on the left here. That's what it's supposed to look like. And you can see that it goes up into this inductor here. And there are the low-side MOSFETs standing up off the board. So this is quite an old-fashioned looking setup here, especially with the high side, with the low-side ones just sticking up like that. These days they'll all be surface mount like these guys are. And they would also have a heatsink on top of them as well. But on low-end motherboards like this, they just use the cheapest setup they can. But also, this board probably doesn't use a lot of power, so it would have been plenty good enough for the CPU that's in there. But under all of that dust, in all probability, it had failed short, and as soon as we put enough power to it, fire to the wire. So that's all I got for you today. I hope you guys found that kind of interesting, or at least entertaining, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye for now.